Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf Tet Zayin. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started from a quick review of yesterday's daf, and I'm going to share the study guide, and you can follow along on this chart. So we saw in the Mishna there were chamisha tamim and chamisha muadim. The way we understood the Mishna until now is there's 5 things: be'mala muad, lo ligoch, lo lashuch, lo lirbot, lo lirbot, all sorts of actions that we assume an animal is not going to do. They're kind of violent actions. Chamisha muadim are the things we expect the animal to do, that the shein normally eats things that normally eats. The regel breaks as it walks. Those 2 things, if you remember, you're only responsible if it's in someone else, that you go into the other person's property. That's from the pasuk, will be as opposed to the keren, which normally happens in the reshut of, right, could be even in reshut rabbim. That was part of our issue. We're going to get back there. Then it says shor muad, which is a shor that's already done all those things that are atypical, did them, all the keren things, they did them already 3 times and were warned. The shor hamazik bereshut hanizak, one who damages a shor, sorry, I should read it better, shor hamazik bereshut hanizak, the one who damages in the property of someone else, which means keren damages, right? And which sounds like keren damages even if you weren't forewarned before. That was where we got into the problem. Then the last one is Adam, a person, which we're not going to deal with right now. We said that line, Shor Mazik Bereshut and Yizak, is actually Rabbi Tarfon's opinion, because Rabbi Tarfon says, keren, if you do keren in someone else's, you do something atypical, but you're in the other person's field or house, then you're actually liable full damages. And that's why it's on the list in the second list. The problem is that we assume that shein, when shein is not liable in Reshut Rabbim, which means that the first part is also talking about Chatzer and Yizak. And what does it say in the first part? You're not muad to do all these things, and you're not going to pay full damages. So something doesn't jive with this Mishna, to which basically we said, it sounds like the beginning of the Mishna is the rabbis who say you only pay half damages if you're in the property of someone else. And the second part, which goes like Rabbi Tarfon, it says you actually do pay full damages if you're in the property of someone else. So that's where we ended. The Shmuel said, you know what? It's okay. You can do that, even though maybe it's not ideal, but you can say the first part is the rabbis and the second part is Rabbi Tarfon. Today, we're going to see 3 other interpretations. Okay, so starting with the last line on Tefav Amabet, Rabbi Elazar, Mishmei de Rav Amal. Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rav that Kula Rabbi Tarfon. We're now going to explain the entire thing like Rabbi Tarfon. And how so? What we're going to say, that Reisha, the first part, is talking about a unique situation. You're not a Reshut Rabbim. You are a Reshut Nizak, the person whose property you damage, but, and likewise with the shein, you're in the same type of courtyard, but what is it? It's a unique courtyard. It's a Chatzer miyuchedet leperot le'echad mehen, u'lezeh v'lezeh l'shvarim. Well, it's some sort of joint courtyard where both the one who damaged, who had the shor damaged, and the one whose shor was damaged, both of them, or something else was damaged, both of them have rights to have their oxen there. But only one of them has rights to have their produce there. So it's only for one of them regarding produce, which makes sense that by produce it's called private domain, which means the animal who eats there is going to be liable, because for the produce only, right? So that animal that belonged to, let's say, if Ruth damaged Naomi, so Ruth's ox was allowed to be there, but wasn't allowed to eat there because none of the produce belonged to Ruth. So if she damages Naomi's produce, well, that's Ruth's fault. But when it comes to keren, if she damages Naomi's ox, since both of them had the rights to be there, both oxen, then it's actually like Reshut Harabim. And that's what we're going to read now. Regarding eating, it was really only belonging to Naomi. But legabe keren havi Reshut Harabim. But for regarding the issue of keren, of the goring, it actually belonged to both of them. So they're both equally, right? Basically, it's like keren and Reshut Harabim, where you're going to be obligated, okay? And that's why, right, but you're obligated only half damages, okay? And then the last part is where you're going to be, and then that's Rabbi Tarfon, because Rabbi Tarfon says if it belongs to both of you and it's in public, then that's where you're obligated only half damages. But if you actually go into the next person's property, then you're actually going to be obligated for full damages. And that's the last part of the, at the end of the Mishna. The end of this part of the Mishna anyway, the shor hamazik bereshut hanizak. You're obligated full damages, because that's what Rabbi Tarfon says. It was only Naomi's animal was allowed to be there. Ruth's was not. I'm a Rav Kahana. Well, let's see what Rav Kahana has to say with Rabbi Elazar's explanation. He's not going to like it. I told it to Rav Zvid in front of Nahardeh. It's actually not Rav Kana. It's Rav Zvid who's going to go against it. And he said, how can you possibly say this whole Mishna is Rabbi Tarfon? It says, Hakatani, doesn't it say, Hashem muad lechol et ha'oila? Shane, okay, again, Ruth's animal comes into Naomi's property and eats. What did we say? If she, according to the Mishnah, Ruth's shor ate, her ox ate food that is typical for her to eat, she'll be obligated, which sounds like ra'oila'in, only if it's normal, typical food that a shor would eat. Shein ra'oila, if it's not things that the shor normally eats and the shor ate it, they wouldn't be obligated. Now, what did Rabbi Tarfon say? Now, if it's atypical food, what do we call that? Keren. If we call it keren, what does Rabbi Tarfon say? If you do keren in the reshut of someone else, Ruth does it in Naomi's property, you're going to be liable full damages. But this only says, only if it's typical. So, again, Rabbi Tarfon ha'amal, mishune keren b'chatzer nizak nezek shalem shalem. Anyone who does something in your field, even if it's strange because they walked into your field, what were they doing there? Right? They have to pay full damages. So, it doesn't make sense then, because Hashem muad lechol et ha'oila, it should be et ha'oila ve'et she'eino ra'oila. You'd be liable full damages. And therefore, so they offer us a third explanation. Rabbanit. So Rav Kahana says, okay, this is probably a continuation of Rav Kahana, who says, when I said it to Rav Zvid, he rejected it. So therefore he suggests the following. Really, the whole thing is the rabbis. And now we're going to read it differently than we read it until now. We assumed there were 5 tamim and 5 muadim, and we listed them. But remember, there was a bit of a problem with this, because after the 5 muadim, it lists the ari, the namer, the bardelas, the dove, the nachash, right? It lists these others, which means there's more than 5 muadim, which you could explain in some way, but he's going to have a better way to read this Mishna. This is how it should be. Chamishat tamim hem. So that we have, right? Don't gore, push, all those things. Ve'im huadu, but if they were already warned, chamishtan muadin, the chamisha muadim actually goes with the beginning. There's 5 cases where you'll be a short time, and if you're warned, then you turn into these 5 cases of muad. And then we have another list, and the list goes like this, and it's not 5. It's shein v'regel, which are either 1 or 2. Let's count them as 2. Muadim mitchilatan, they're warned from the beginning, not like what we said before about all those other actions. V'hechan ha'adatan b'chatzer nizak. Instead of reading and a shor hamuad, which is number 3, and shor mazik, right, a shor that was warned, meaning not to gore. That's how we assumed in the first one. And a shor that damages in the property of the person who owns it, right? In other words, Ruth's shor goes into Naomi's property, which we assume meant, and she did keren, which was Rabbi Tarfon. Now we're going to say, no. Both those lines are coming to define shein and regel. And it's saying the following. When are shein and regel muadim? Not anywhere, but b'chatzer nizak. So, shor muad and shor mazik is explaining the shein and the regel that we just talked about are only going to be obligated muadim. They're going to have to pay full damages if they're in someone else's property. But if it's in the public domain, they're not going to be obligated, which matches the halacha. It's just a different way of reading this. But Makifla Ravina says this doesn't make any sense, because you didn't read forward to the next chapter in the Mishnah. Now, the next chapter in the Mishnah, okay, reads like this, okay? The next chapter is all based on our Mishnah. The next chapter starts with Ketzad haregel muad l'shaber b'derech hilucha. It's a bit out of order because it starts with regel. Then it goes to shein. Ketzad hashem muad lechol et ha'oila. In other words, it goes to these lines in our Mishnah. It says, how is regel? What normal case would be your case of regel that would damage? What would be a case of shein that would damage? Then it goes to what is tam and what is muad, which is relating to the shor hamuad. Then it goes to shor hamazik b'reshut hanizak ketzad. Then it goes to, right, what is a shor hamazik b'reshut hanizak? What's a case? Now, first of all, it means it's not relating to shein and regel. And the continuation of that reads like this. What is a shor hamazik b'reshut hanizak? As we thought originally. Nagach, nashach, rabatz ba'ad. All those actions from before, if they did them once, right, they did them in reshut. Right, so now we're going to see in reshut harabim mishalem chatzi nezek. If it happens in the public domain, since they're not muadim to do this, they only pay half damages. If it's b'reshut hanizak, Rabbi Tarfon omer nezek shalem v'chachamim omrim chatzi nezek. And then we have it. The Mishnah tells you that it's a machloket. So first of all, we have a few strange things. Why would our Mishnah here not mention the machloket if it mentions it later? And why would it say it only according to one opinion? But that we're going to deal with in a minute. Right now, Ravina thinks it is all, right? He's going to say, that's number one, right? It shouldn't be all one opinion. And he's going to say, shor hamazik b'reshut nizak ketzad yamar bishlamei arabe mishum hachi katana ketzad. If you're saying it's talking about keren, well, that's why it says it there, and it mentions all the toledot of keren. But Iyamar lo Irebe, if it's not referring to that, then my ketzad, then what does ketzad mean? If Shein and Regel are not a new case, and it's just part of, right, Shein and Regel, well, then that whole Mishnah in the next chapter makes absolutely no sense. And therefore, Ravina rejects it. They don't ask the question I did about, but you'll see in his answer, there's a reference to the fact that if they mention Machlok or Rabbi Tarfon in there, and the rabbis there, they must have mentioned it here. So Ela Ama Ravina. Ravina says, my answer is like this. The Mishnah is missing words, and this is how it should read. And again, in light of the second chapter, this makes perfect sense. Again, 5 tamim. There are 5 actions you do where you're a short time, not expected. But if you become warned for them, then you're liable, full, right? Then you're going to have full damages. And then in addition, there's shein v'rega muadim mitchilatan and zehu shor muad. That's what we call a shor muad. A shor that from the beginning is already going to be liable because that's someone who eats or tramples on things. And where is that? Shor mazik b'reshut hanizak. Well, now, sorry. And then assume, this is different than before, assume that this is all in the reshut hanizak that we know, but that's not what it says here. And then it says, shor hamazik b'reshut hanizak. If you have a shor that does keren damages, as the Mishnah later said, in the property of Ruth's animal goes and gores Naomi's animal in Naomi's property, well, then we have machloket Rabbi Tarfon v'Rabbanan, whether it's full damages, the Rabbi Tarfon says, or whether it's half damages like the rabbis. And then already here in his reading, the Mishnah is referencing the fact that there's 2 opinions here. V'yesh muadin acherim, and then it relates to what I said before, which is what about the whole rest of the Mishnah? And then they say, and by the way, since we mentioned 5 tamim and 5 muadim, and then we started listing this other list. And yesh muadim acherim kayotze be'elu hazeh v'ha'ari hadova bardelas v'namer v'nachash. And then, by the way, there's a whole bunch of others. Notice he skipped Adam here, which is a little bit strange because it also said Adam in our Mishnah, which, by the way, is the next Mishnah in the second chapter, Adam muad la'olam, and that's going to get us to fascinating sudyot about human responsibility for their actions. Anyway, they probably skipped the Adam because of this next line, because now we're going to say, and I don't know if it's skipped on purpose, but his reading seems to mimic exactly, and that's why they're bringing a Tanya Nami Hachi, a braita that says exactly what we just said in our Mishnah, but in a braita, and it just gets rid of the Adam case for some reason, right? Because you could say this braita was just talking about animals, but notice all the wording is exactly like our Mishnah, other than that Adam is missing. Chamishat tamim hem ve'imu adu chamishta muadim. Right, so again, there's 5 tamim, and if they're warned, then they become muad. And then it says, v'shein v'rega muadim mitzchilatan, they're warned from the beginning, zehu shor muad. This is a case of a shor that's warned. V'shor hamazik b'reshut hanizak, and if you have a shor that damages, keren damages in the property of the damaged person, machloket Rabbi Tarfon v'Rabbanan, whether you're liable of half or full damage. V'yesh muadim acharim kayotze be'elu, and there's more, which are the ze'ev, the ari, the dov, the namer, the bardelas, and the nachash, period. Okay, and there we have our 4 explanations of how to read this Mishnah based on our issue we brought up already in the previous stuff, and finish with that topic. Okay, Ravina seems to really be the best explanation. And again, we rejected 2 of the explanations, but we did end up keeping the first one, even though it's a little bit difficult to say the beginning is Rabbanan and the second is Rabbi Tarfon. Now, some people raised a contradiction, and now we're going to see there's 3 ways to read. I think it's 2 ways. Maybe this one is 2 ways. 2 ways to, right, sorry. I just got confused with the later section. We're now going to say that there's a different way to read how we got to Ravina. Okay, it's going to be in the end the same reading. It's just going to be introduced in a different manner. Some people just started off by saying there's a contradiction. What's the contradiction? Not the same problem we had before about the Resha Rabbanan and the Sefer Rabbi Tarfon, but it says Tanan chamisha tamim b'chamisha muadim, and then they say v'tuleka, but aren't there more? There's another 6 more listed. And they answered, the Ravina changed the way to read the Mishnah and read it in the following way, which we already know. This is how to read it. There's 5 that are tamim, 5 actions that you're not warned about, that we don't expect the animal to do, but if they already did it 3 times and we warn them, they all become muad, warned. And then they're going to pay full damages instead of half. Shein v'rega muadim mitchilatan, as opposed to shein and rega, where they're warned from the beginning. V'zeu shor muad, that's what we call a shor muad, and shor mazik v'rshut and nizak machlok of Rabbi Tarfon for Rabbanan, and a shor mazik. Remember, that's if you damage in the person's property, even though it's atypical damage, you might be, according to Rabbi Tarfon, you'll be liable full damages. According to the rabbis, it's still only half. And there's more muadim, like the ze'ev, the ari, the dov, the namer, the bardelas, and the nachash. Okay, that's the end of that section of how to understand the Mishnah as a whole and how does it read. Now we're going to go to one of the details of the shor muad, which was lirbots, low lirbots. We don't expect crouching. This is where we're going to have 3 different versions of Rabbi Elazar. Some, he ends up saying the same thing. Some he says something different. And the question is, what about this other source and how does it interplay with Rabbi Elazar? So we're going to have 3 different readings of the Sunnah. Amar Rabbi Elazar. According to the first reading, Rabbi Elazar says, Lo shanu ela pachim gdolim. When we don't expect the animal to crouch and cause damage, we're talking about on something big. We don't expect the animal to crouch down into something huge. But pachim ktanim or chehu, but small things, it's actually very typical that the animal's going to crouch on them and break them as it's going. Lema Meseele, and they say, oh, well, this reading of Rabbi Elazar should support the following source. The animal is already forewarned from the beginning. They're expected that as they walk, they break things, they crush humans, animals, and vessels. Now, if we don't think that animals crouch on things and break them, ever, even on small ones, then this braita makes no sense. So you'd have to explain that the braita must be talking about small people, like little kids, little animals, and little vessels. And that would be the distinction that Rabbi Elazar makes. And therefore, Rabbi Elazar can be used to, right, this braita can be used to support Rabbi Elazar, which they say this braita doesn't provide support at all for Rabbi Elazar because dilma min atzad. It could be when it crushes them. It's not crushing them by crouching on them. It never said crouching. It said crushes. How could you crush? Could be, let's say the animal's near the wall and there's a person there and he crushes the person from the side. And then that has nothing to do at all with crouch. That is definitely more expected, they're assuming. Ikeda Amre, some people say, Amar Rabbi Elazar, second version. Rabbi Elazar said, Lo tema pachim gedolim hu delav orchi. Don't say only big things is not typical. Ela pachim ktanim orchi hu. Don't say, but small vessels, it's pretty common. Ela afilu pachim ktanim nami lav orchi. But even small vessels, it's really not typical. And then, meaning we don't expect them to sit and crouch on any of these things. So then they say, well, meitive, and what is this source talking about? When it says, it is assumed to do that kind of thing. So what would that be talking about if not crushing small things? To which Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar answers, dilma min atzad. Maybe that braita is talking about crushing from the side. And then there's no contradiction. And then according to this, Rabbi Elazar says the opposite of what he said before, that no crushing, no crouching, is ever a problem, even on small vessels. The third version starts off differently. Let's see. Starts off, Ika derami le mirma, just like we had with Ravina before, that instead of Ravina explaining this, we started with some other question. Well, some people bring a contradiction from the start. Tnan velo lirbots. It says in a Mishnah, it says in a braita, lo lirbots, right? It says in our Mishnah, lo lirbots. You can't, right? The animal is not allowed to crouch, but again, that's a tam. We're not expecting it. And then it says in the braita, as if that is typical, that is, is considered typical. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, lo kasha kam b'pachim gdolim, kam b'pachim ktanim. And here, it's because of the contradiction in the between the braita and the Mishnah that Rabbi Elazar came out with his explanation, distinguishing, and then it matches the first, just not the way he got there, distinguishing between pachim gdolim and pachim ktanim. Okay, small and larger vessels. Now we're getting to the ze'ev and all those other animals, and we're going to focus on the bardelas. One of the ones listed was the bardelas. My bardelas. The Gemara wants to know, what is this? Because this is your classic sugya where the Amoraim didn't know what the word in the Mishnah was. Amar Rabbi Yehuda nafriza. Rabbi Yehuda in the second generation Amoraim explains it as a nafriza, which we don't know what that is. Neither did the fourth generation Amoraim. So my nafriza, what is that? Amar Rabbi Yosef apa. Yosef explains apa, which we don't know what that is either. But in a minute we're going to see then apa is a tzavua, which a tzavua is a modern Hebrew word. That's a hyena. So the Kohen gives some other possible explanations. It could be a cheetah. They're definitely from that family. So now, we're now going to say, wait a minute. Rabbi Meir Omer, Afat Savua. Rabbi Meir adds to the list even a hyena. And Rabbi Elazar Omer, Afa Nachash. Rabbi Elazar also adds even the snake. V'amar Rabbi Yosef, Tzavua zo apa. And Rabbi Yosef, who said that this bardelas was an apa, also said that an apa is a tzavua. So Rabbi Meir can't be adding to the list something that already was there. So lo kashya, kam b'tzavua sachal, kam b'tzavua nekeba. We're now saying there's a male and a female, and they're different. One is called this bardelas, and one is called the tzavua, and Rabbi Meir was adding the other one. Some people say that, right, it means one was obviously more dangerous and one was less dangerous. Which one was which is a good question. That Rashi brings two different versions of which one is considered more dangerous. Daytime, as it says in a braita. Now here we're just going to mention this tzavua and how they were nervous about it. They were concerned about it, but here for a bit of a different reason because of its metamorphosis. Okay, they have this belief, according to this braita, tzavua zachar lachar sheva shanim na'asa atalef. A male tzavua, hyena, metamorphosizes into a bat, okay, an insect-eating bat. Atalef lachar sheva shanim na'asa arpad, which is a herbivorous bat. Arpad lachar sheva shanim na'asa kimosh. It becomes a type of thicket. It's a thorny bush. Which is another very thorny bush. Seems to be worse. Okay, these seem to be stages of things that are much more dangerous as they go on. Because eventually you get to, they become an evil spirit. This is why the Zachar perhaps was considered more dangerous, although some people have a version that this braita shows the Zachar actually metamorphosizes first into a female one. And then from there to the bats, and from there. And that shows that the female was actually more dangerous than the male. Okay, in any case, there's a bit of a strange source. We're going to move on. That wasn't strange. Now they say the spine of a human becomes a snake 7 years after his death. But this is only if you didn't bow down when thanking God, because you bow down using your spine, and then you get punished in your spine if you don't do that. And then your spine will turn into a snake. This is one of the ways the rabbis used to fear people, get them scare tactics into doing things they thought were important. They want to stress the importance of how important it is to thank God. It's a value. It's a little bit of a strange way to say it. But again, that's kind of, we've seen this in many sugyot. It's the way the rabbis would speak in a lot of times to kind of, scare tactics. Okay, Amar, back to this line we quoted from the braita before. Rabbi Meir Omer Afa Tzavua, even the Tzavua. Rabbi Elazar Omer Afa Nachash. So now we're going to say, how can Rabbi Elazar add even the Nachash? Wasn't the Nachash in our list? And not only that, right? That's number one problem. Okay, but it sounds like Rabbi Elazar, it's actually more of a problem because maybe there was some list that didn't include it. But Rabbi Elazar said, if you remember in the Mishna, Bizman shehim b'nei tarbut enam muadim v'nachash muad lo'olam. All these other animals, if they were domesticated, then they're not dangerous. Okay, they're not expected to do terrible things, but not a nachash. A nachash will always be, assumed that they're up to evil. So how could he say even the Nachash? Doesn't make any sense, his language. Nachash is much worse than the rest of them. That's why it says, doesn't it say that Rabbi Elazar Omer, as I said before, Nachash muad olam, but he's always. Today Nachash, he just says, he puts in Nachash, not that he says even the Nachash, they get rid of the word even. Amar Shmuel. Now Shmuel's going to have this halacha, we're going to have struggled a bit to understand. Ari bereshut harabim daras v'achal patur tarat v'achal chayav. So now we're going to talk about this lion. We have a lion in the public domain. Now again, public domain, we're only going to be liable. We're not liable for shame, for regular eating, but we are liable for something that's atypical. So now, if he daras, we're going to make a distinction between daras v'achal and tarat v'achal. In the Quran, they have a very good footnote explaining the Steinsaltz, the difference between daras v'achal and tarat v'achal. Taras v'achal is with your claws. Now, normally, that's the way an animal attacks its prey. It claws it, kills it, and then eats it, or maybe not even fully kills it. Taras v'achal, actually, I think there we do fully kill it. Taraf achal is just to grab it with its teeth and just eat it. That's not typical. So therefore, daras v'achal, if it does that in the middle of the public domain, then it's patur, because that's a typical way of doing it, and then it's shein, the way an animal normally eats. And again, if that's in public, you're not liable, because we assume animals are eating things that are out in the public thoroughfare. But taraf v'achal, which is atypical, that's keren, then you're going to be chayav. Again, if it would be atypical, so it would be split between right, chatzi nezek, if he hadn't been forewarned. If he'd been forewarned, it would have been nezek shalem, full damage. So now the Gemara is going to explain this inside. Daras v'achal patur. Again, if he claws it and eats it, you'll be exempt. Kevan de orche lemidras, because that's the typical way it does it. It's just like eating fruits and vegetables in the public domain. Then it's just classic shein in the public domain where you're patur, exempt. Taraf, but taraf is lav orchehu. So then they say, wait a minute. Taraf is not typical? Are you really saying that's an atypical way of a lion? Now, instead of usually proving this from evidence on the street, the way they always like to prove this is from verses in the Torah or in the Tanakh. So now they quote a pasuk from Nahum that says, Haktiv, Aryeh toref b'dei gorotav. In Aryeh toref, which is attacks, right, with its teeth, the food for its young, for its cubs. So there you see, it does attack and eat. To which they say, what do you mean? It doesn't attack and eat. It's b'shvil gorotav. That's just for its cubs. We were talking about a case where it attacked it and ate it immediately. That's not what's talking about in this pasuk. Now you can read this next section, okay, these next few things as question, answer, or you can read the whole thing as just an explanation to support the first reading. Either which way, it's going to support what we just said, which is mechanek leleviotav. We're reading the rest of the verse, which is he strangles for the purpose of the lionesses, the females. Bishvil leviotav. Again, that is explained as he doesn't. Again, all these things are going to prove he doesn't attack it for his own sake. He had to eat right away. No, he attacks it for his cubs, for his lionesses. Then, he fills up all the stuff he attacked, fills up holes, or however you translate this, bishvil cholav, right? He's doing it to store. Again, this proves he's not doing it for his own sake to eat immediately, but for later. Monotav treifa, and his home, his abode is filled with treifa, with animals he attacked. Bishvil monotav. Again, it's all for the purpose of storing it. That proves, like we wanted to show before, which is Shmuel, who says, Taraf achal, you're going to be liable in the public domain because it's not typical for him to do that and immediately eat it. But now the Gemara is going to bring a braita, which seems like it is typical. Here we have an animal. It goes into someone else's property. Okay, so Ruth's animal goes into Naomi's property. If the animal attacked another animal and ate the meat, they will pay full damages. Why are they paying full damages? Because, right, it's typical. So now, right, we're going to assume, by the way, this is shein. Shein in the private domain, you're liable full damages. To which they answer, no, what it means is they attacked it in order to put it aside. And then it would be keren, and right, then it would be, that would explain that it's atypical. Okay, now they say, wait a minute, a few questions. But wait, doesn't it say she ate it? She attacked it and ate it. She didn't put it aside. To which they answer, well, what happened was that you'll see the Gemara is going to have some questions on this. The animal, Ruth's animal, comes into Naomi's courtyard. She attacks an animal to store it for later, which would be considered, right? That would be keren. It wouldn't be shein. But again, then you would have to say, right, Mishalem nezek shalem. Perhaps this could be also Rabbi Tarfon, that you pay nezek shalem in there. But anyway, the point is, you would then, and that's, again, we're trying to figure out why tarfa v'achla, right? So now, what's the issue here? We're going to say tarfa behema v'achla. The lion attacked it. It was typical. It was expected, and that's why it's nezek shalem, because the lion meant to put it aside. But then the lion changed its mind and ate it. And that must be what the braita is talking about. And that's why it says ekshalem, because again, if it's atypical, then you're not going to be liable full damages. So we have to make a case where it's typical. But we already said it's not typical, litrof alecho. So it's what's typical, litrof, and to put it aside. Why did the animal eat it then? Well, because the animal changed its mind. To which the Gemara says, what? Number one, minayadinan. How on earth do we know what the animal intended and then changed its mind? We didn't ask the lion, what were you thinking? If you're going to say that you're liable nezek shalem because it was typical behavior and expected behavior, and that's why you're liable, and then it would be like a toladav shame, then according to Shmuel, it should be the same. And then it should be a toladav shame. And it should be, if you do it in public, it wouldn't be the case. In other words, if you say in the braita, taraf achal could be taraf to put it aside and then change its mind, you could say the same thing to Shmuel. Your case, why are you assuming the animal didn't change its mind? Maybe the animal changed its mind and maybe it is typical. So it really doesn't make any sense. So basically, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says you have to understand this braita differently, that it's not taraf achal like Shmuel was talking about, and that's why the halacha is different. But tarfa lahaniach o darsav achla. Litzadim means each case is a different scenario. There's two things going on here. One is tarfa, to put aside, tack the animal to leave the food for later. And the other is darsav achla, okay, that they clawed at it and then ate it, okay? And that's the situation. Misham, and then mishalem and nezek shalem, and that's how to read the braita. Those are both typical scenarios. Okay, so we're left with, let's just review, that Shmuel, when he said this ari in the public domain, if he did it in one way, it's expected and it's chained. If he did it in the other way, it's not expected. To which we ask, well, what do you mean it's not expected that the animal attacks and eats? And then they say, no, it's really not. The animal usually attacks and puts the food aside. You have a problem with the pasuk? No, the pasuk really showed that. And you have a problem with the braita? The braita was really saying the same thing, because the braita was split into two. One was taraf and put aside, which would be typical, and that's why it was nezek shalem. And the other was daras v'achal, which is the way the animal normally does it, which all fits in with Shmuel. And that's how we explain it. Okay, that's the first way to understand Shmuel. Ravina amal ki ka'amar Shmuel ba'ari tarbut. Ravina is going to say I have a different way to distinguish between the braita and Shmuel, by saying that the braita really is talking about the same case. It's not two different cases. But Shmuel was talking about an ari mitorbat, as we say in Hebrew, which is a domesticated ari. And because it was domesticated, that's why it's going to be exempt in the public domain, because it's not typical, because you're not expecting that kind of behavior from a domesticated lion. You always have lions, right? Pet lions. I have a pet lion. Pet lion's not expected to behave that way on the street. And that's why I'm exempt. That's why I'm chayav, because again, it's keren and it's not shame. As soon as it turns into keren, I'll be liable in the public domain. I'll only have to pay half, but I will be liable. So then they say, liable to Rabbi Elazar, da'amar lav orche, and it would obviously only match Rabbi Elazar, Shmuel, because Rabbi Elazar is the one who says if it's a domesticated lion, then it's not its typical way. To which they say, well then, also the first case of Shmuel, daras va'achal, is also not expected of a domesticated lion. So that doesn't make any sense, and therefore they change Ravina and they say, Ella de Ravina lava Shmuel itma. Ravina wasn't really referring to Shmuel, sorry, mistake. Ella, in other words, the Gemara is saying we made a mistake. What Ella amatnita? When Ravina said it was a lion who was domesticated, they were talking about the braita. Again, what did the braita say? The braita said, if your animal, right, Ruth's animal goes into Naomi's garden, at her field, and grabs an animal and eats the meat, then she has to pay full damages. Now, why is this? Because Kitana Matnita Ba'ari Tarbut, it's a domesticated lion. Ba'aliba de Rabbi Elazar de Amar Lav Orche. And it's according to Rabbi Elazar, who says this is not the way. Okay, now what's the problem? If it's atypical, it's in the Rashut Anizak, it's keren, right? What do we say? Keren pays half damages. But this said you pay full damages. So that's what the Gemara says. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because Ihachi, Chatzi Nezek Ba'ilish Shlume, they only should have paid half damages, to which they say DEI. Well, it must have been, it was a domesticated animal who had already done this 3 times. Then they say, Ihachi, my Haidkatani Legabe Tolada de Shen, Gabe Tolada de Keren Ba'ilish. But wait, this whole braita that we quoted happens to be quoted in the 2nd chapter in the context of the Tolada of Shen, of eating, not of Keren. If we're going to say it was a shor muad, and it's keren, it's right, unexpected damages because it was domesticated and then it did it 3 times, that's keren. And this is listed under Shane, so it can't possibly be kasha. And they leave Ravina as totally incomprehensible here. Okay, even though Ravina saved the day in the beginning of our daf, Ravina seems to be very complicated here. Before we start the next Mishna, we'll do a quick review of what we're up to. So we started with the Chamisha Tamim Chamisha Moedim, which we thought was a list of 5, and another list of 5, and then a list of 6, which just didn't have a number. We, in the end, finally, after 4 possible explanations, the 4th one is Ravina, which makes the most sense, which is it's really 5 tamim, which could be all 5 become muadim. Then there's just a list of other ones that are muadim from the beginning. And there's a reference in there to the machloket Rabbi Tarfon and Chachamim, even though it didn't say so in our Mishnah, but we assume it was referencing both opinions and wasn't choosing sides. And then we explained that all. Then we talked about their boats. Is the isur laharbitz, is that's keren. Is that even? Is it atypical? Even small vessels, small things, small animals, small people, or is it anything? Is it atypical even for small things? And then we talked about what's a bardelas. We got into the hyena. Then we moved on to this statement of Shmuel, which we then had some questions on. What do you mean a lion isn't typically attacking animals and eating them with their teeth? And then we said, right, he distinguished between these 2 cases. And in the end, we explained it properly, even though we then brought a second explanation of Ravina, which didn't really make so much sense. But basically, the distinction is, as I said from the beginning, there's a difference between clawing it and eating it. That is typical. But normally, if they take it with their teeth, it's actually not to eat, but it's to put aside for later. Now we get to a new Mishnah. Ma bein tam muad, the last Mishnah of our chapter, and we'll finish the chapter B'ezrat Hashem tomorrow. Ma bein tam muad, ela shatam meshalem chatzi nezek migufo umuad meshalem nezek shalem min aliyah. What's the difference between a tam and a muad? Well, we know the difference already. Tam is only done it once or twice, 3 times, right? After 3 times, they already become a muad. But it's also the way they pay. If you're a shor tam, then you pay no more than the value of the animal, and you can pay with the animal itself. Just give the animal, and that's his payment. Okay, but muad mishalem nezek shalem min aliyah. But if it's muad, then you have to pay full damages. And if your animal Ruth's animal that gored Naomi's animal, if Ruth's animal is not enough to pay, it's worth less than Naomi's animal, she has to pay the difference, min aliyah. In a second, we'll see what that is. My aliyah, amar Rabbi Elazar ben me'ulesha ben chasav. This means with the best of her property. This goes back to what we saw already. Now we're getting totally off topic. And as you see in a pasuk, that aliyah is not going to mean like higher up land, but it means better land. So me'uleh here is not going to be land, but we'll see. Vayishkav Chizkiyahu im avotav, where it says Chizkiyahu died and his father wasn't really so great, and it says when they buried him, vayikbaru b'ma'aleh kivrei b'nei David, which you could have thought is on the heights of the Davidic dynasty's graves. V'amar Rabbi Elazar b'ma'aleh meant eitzel me'ulim sheb'mishpacha. He was put not with his father who wasn't so great, but he was put with the best kings that there were. Maninu, who was that? Obviously David and Shlomo. If we're already talking about his burial, so they quote another pasuk there. He was buried in the graves that they dug in the city of David, and they put him in a place that they filled in a burial plot that they filled with bisamim, spices, znim. My bisamim uznim. What are these znim? Rabbi Elazar Amal zene, which means different types of bisamim. So it was bisamim and znim, meaning different types of bisamim. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani amar bisamim shekol hamereach behem ba lidei zimad. They were such great spices that anyone who smells them ends up getting into trouble with, going after women or something along those lines. Okay, ends up in incestuous behavior or something like that. Okay, now already we got into Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani having a machloket about how to understand a word. We're now going to have another machloket that they have here about another pasuk. And now we're getting more off topic. If we weren't off topic enough, we're getting into a pasuk from Yirmiyahu, right? We got off here because of the word mina aliyah, and then they brought the ma'aleh by the burial of Chizkiyahu. Now we're getting into Yirmiyahu. If you remember, Yirmiyahu had these prophecies, and people were very angry at him, and they did terrible things to him. They put him in jail. They put him in a pit, right, like Joseph. He says to Hashem, right, Yirmiyahu is talking to God. He says, listen, they put me in a pit to trap me, and they put nets for me to kind of get stuck in, my feet to get stuck in. Rabbi Elazar Amar. So the question is, why did they do this? Like what happened here? They claimed, they falsely accused him of being with a prostitute. Now, he was also a Kohen. He was not allowed to have relations with a prostitute. They claimed he was sleeping with a married woman, which is actually more severe. Now, where do we get this from in the Psukim? So it makes sense to say they thought he was with a zonah because it says, Hainu dichtiv, in a different pasuk, they use the same word as used here, kikaru shucha. The word shucha, by the way, this connects with our topic because we're talking about digging pits and throwing people, right? It's not exactly throwing people into pits, but it is a little similar. But anyway, how do we know they accused him of being with a prostitute? Because Hainu dichtiv ki shucha amuka zonah. Okay, the zonah is a deep pit, right? Like you get in with a prostitute, you're digging yourself a deep pit. That's a pasuk in Mishna, and it connects the word shucha with zonah. But if you say he was with a married woman, my shucha, what's shucha? To which they say, what are you talking about? Why are you even asking that? In Eshet Ish is a zonah. What's a zonah? It's not just a prostitute who sleeps with many men. It's just anyone who's forbidden for you to sleep with. So basically, that's a married woman, and therefore both of them really connect with that word. To which they continue this discussion of which is a better interpretation. The next pasuk says, they wanted to kill me. You know they wanted to kill me. So it makes sense. Eshet Ish, they could have killed him. If they accused him falsely of Eshet Ish, they could have killed him based on their false accusations. But Mavet doesn't mean it. They can't kill someone by doing that. Why lamavet? Well, they threw him into a pit. That could have caused his death. And that's what he was referring to. Not that they were going to convict me in a court, but that they actually threw me in a pit. Darish Rab. Now we're going to continue with that pasuk about the God, you know how bad they did to me. The end of that, all the bad things they did. At the end of that pasuk basically says to them, they should fail in front of you, like they should, be failures, the Jewish people, these people who did this to me. When you're angry, you should do to them. So what does this pasuk mean? Darish Rabba says, what he said was, even when they're doing tzedakah and righteous deeds, make them give tzedakah and charity to people who are bad. Because giving charity to bad people is actually not considered giving charity. It won't really help them in the end. They won't get rewarded, right? Because I don't want them, they're going to do good things, get rewarded, and then they're going to be able to, they're going to be stronger. And I think you should really destroy them for the bad things they did, and don't even let their good deeds go rewarded. So have them give charity to bad people. Now, this would have to be that they know. The commentaries say, if you don't know you're giving to a bad person, it actually is considered a good deed because you had good intention. But if you knew as a bad person, then giving charity, it's a very interesting thought. Giving charity to a bad person is actually not even considered a good deed. It's interesting. Okay, last line for today, back to Chizkiyahu. Kavod asulo b'moto. When he died, it was honorable what they did to him. What does that mean? Melamed shows shivu yeshiva al kivro, a very strange thing, that they decided to sit and learn Torah by his grave. Pliga bar Rabbi Natan Rabbanan, there's machloket about this exactly. Chad amar shlosha, Chad amar shiva. Amri la shloshim. One said it was 3 days, one said it was 7 days, and some people even say it was 30 days. Okay, that there was some sort of learning Torah that happened by his graveside in honor of Chizkiyahu. Okay, that's it. That was a big aside from our topic, and finish here. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and hopefully a quiet, peaceful Shabbat.